Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington. That was the closing bell on Wall Street as markets rallied from down over 1,000 points, but still closed in the red amid the growing uncertainty from the war against Iran. The price of oil continued to tick higher. It's now up roughly 10% since the start of the war just a few days ago. And today, the president posting on social media, the U.S. will provide a financial lifeline for maritime trade. And if necessary, the U.S. Navy will begin escorting tankers in the region to prevent an oil supply crunch. It, of course, comes as we count down to the first primary races of the 2026 midterms tonight. With the economy and the cost of living top of mind for voters, we will have much more on the big political night ahead a little bit later on this hour. But we do begin with President Trump taking questions on camera for the first time since the U.S. and Israel launched those joint strikes, killing Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, and thrusting the entire region into a broader war. 4 days into the conflict, one of the biggest questions remains why the president decided to go to war right now. Here's what he told reporters today.
Mr. President, did Israel force your hand to launch these strikes against Iran? Did Netanyahu pull the United States into this war?
No, I might have forced their hand. You see, we were having negotiations with these lunatics, and it was my opinion that they were going to attack first. They were going to attack. If we didn't do it, they were going to attack first. I felt strongly about that. We're hitting them very hard, and the big scale hitting goes now. They no longer have air protection. They no longer have any detection facilities at all left, and so they're gonna be in for a lot of hurt.
It stands in stark contrast to what Secretary of State Marco Rubio told reporters yesterday ahead of the administration's briefing with top congressional leaders.
We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed.
Moments ago, Secretary of State Rubio spoke to reporters and was pressed about that discrepancy. Here's some of what he said.
I was very clear in that answer. This was a question of timing, of why this had to happen as a joint operation, not the question of the intent. Once the president made a decision that negotiations were not going to work, that they were playing us on the negotiations, and that this was a threat that was untenable, the decision was made to strike them. That's what I said yesterday.
Right now, Secretary Rubio, along with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Dan Kane are all back on Capitol Hill to brief Congress about the U.S. military operations in Iran, and we will be keeping a very close eye on what lawmakers say after that closed-door briefing. Today, President Trump was also asked about the worst-case scenario in Iran, which comes as he leaves open the possibility of boots on the ground.
I guess the worst case would be we do this and then somebody takes over who's as bad as the previous person, right? That could happen. We don't want that to happen. That would probably be the worst. You go through this and then in 5 years you realize you put somebody in who was no better. So we'd like to see somebody in there that's going to bring it back for the people. And we'll see what happens with the people.
Amid that leadership vacuum in Tehran today, Israel bombed a building being used by Iran's Assembly of Experts, the body tasked with electing the new supreme leader. Meanwhile, many Americans still in the region are now caught in the crossfire, and we're getting these new dramatic images out of Dubai, where the U.S. consulate was hit by a drone. Dubai's media office says it extinguished a limited fire in the vicinity of the consulate, and the incident did not result in any injuries. It comes after yesterday the U.S. Embassy in Riyadh was attacked by 2 drones, resulting in a limited fire and minor damage to that building. That's according to the Saudi Ministry of Defense. The State Department, meanwhile, announcing it was closing at least 3 of its embassies in the region while urging Americans in the region to leave. And for those who can't, to call the State Department's emergency hotline. This is part of the recording they hear when they do. Listen.
Please do not rely on the U.S. government for assisted departure or evacuation at this time. There are currently no United States evacuation points.
This afternoon, the State Department announced it is actively securing military aircraft and chartering flights for American citizens who wish to leave the region. Joining me now is our team of reporters covering all of the angles. NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Cheung, NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba, NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley, and NBC News national security correspondent Courtney Kube, also with me, retired four-star general and former director of the CIA, David Petraeus. Thanks to all of you for starting us off. Brian, I want to start with you because the markets just closed, so I want to talk about energy prices, gas prices, oil prices. They're all up. What are the implications? What are you watching for?
Yeah, and this is a continuation of the story that we have been tracking over the weekend with the Strait of Hormuz. Again, that really narrow channel that is the access point into Iran, as well as Iraq, Kuwait, the UAE, Qatar, major oil producers, all of them accounting for about 20% of oil production in the world. And so for that reason, any conflict would lead to closure of the Strait of Hormuz could lead to a substantial spiking in oil prices, and that's what we're seeing already. So if you take a look at prices at the pump, at least by Gas Buddy, we've seen that prices at the pump are now averaging $3.11. That is up 6 cents just from yesterday, 15 cents from the last week. For every $10 that an estimated barrel of oil goes up in price, the consumer faces about a 25-cent increase in the prices that they pay at the pump. This is happening already, and if this is indeed a conflict that's going to go for 4 or 5 weeks, as has been suggested, that could continue to go up depending on how long and how close the Strait of Hormuz is, Kristen.
Brian, it's just extraordinary because President Trump actually acknowledged today oil prices were higher, but he tried to downplay concerns about long-term prices. Take a listen to what he said. Get your reaction on the other side.
If we have a little high oil prices for a little while, but as soon as this ends, those prices are going to drop, I believe, lower than even before.
And Brian, we should note he also announced the U.S. Navy plans to escort tankers. Did these prices, and do they run the risk of spiraling out of control for an extended period of time?
Yeah, well, the president's Truth Social post from just in the last hour or so, it does underscore that the administration wants to take some action to make sure that tankers can flow through the Strait of Hormuz and keep that flow of oil going through. But again, you have to remember what the Iranians are threatening. They're threatening to set any ship that goes through the Strait of Hormuz on fire. So if the president is saying, hey, the United States will insure ships that are going through that channel and also have a Navy escort to accompany some of those ships, is that going to be enough to assuage the fears of all of those tankers that want to traffic or rather move oil through that region? It's unclear. And you do also run the risk of further escalation if a ship tries to pass through and then gets attacked by the Iranians. So again, this is a very serious situation here. It's unclear about whether or not that Truth Social post is going to reopen the flow of oil. It's a very serious situation for right now. Oil markets do appear to be moving on that.
It certainly is. All right, Brian Cheung, thank you so much for that. Monica, let me turn to you at the White House. You've been working your sources. Of course, this post recently came out about the U.S. Navy escorting ships. What are your sources telling you about this latest development?
Well, this is something that Secretary Rubio telegraphed yesterday, Kristen, saying that this was going to be something that was likely going to be an issue that they were tracking. The Trump administration was worried about what might happen to oil prices. And so that is why the president had a meeting today with the Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, and with the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, where they did agree that the United States Development Finance Corporation is going to provide basically insurance to some of these massive tankers. And as you were just discussing, will say that if the U.S. Navy needs to, can escort them through the Strait of Hormuz. If that is something that's going to happen, I think it is notable as you're talking about the domestic impact of this when we're talking about gas prices. That is something that this administration tracks very closely, is always talking about, is always touting when they're down. So certainly they are following this very closely and looking at additional ways potentially to mitigate that aspect. Kristen.
Certainly, gas prices always top of mind for this administration and, quite frankly, any administration. Monica, let me ask you, broadly speaking, about what went into the president's decision to launch these operations, the timing of it. What more are you learning about that?
Well, we heard from some senior administration officials today who pulled back the curtain a bit on the way that the diplomatic negotiations just totally devolved. From the U.S. perspective, they are making the argument that the Iranians were playing a game and were just trying to draw out the U.S. negotiators who were at the table, who, of course, were the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, who had been going back and forth to Geneva. And according to these officials, essentially, they said they came back after the latest round of talks. They told the president that they didn't believe that Iran and the negotiators were acting in good faith. They felt like there was an urgency given what they were able to develop, what they were moving underground, what could be the possibility of this nuclear weapon and further enrichment, and that is why the president decided to go with the military strikes, because the diplomatic talks had broken down to such a point of no return. Kristen.
Well, Monica, great reporting there. And I have to ask you about this developing story. Americans trying to get out of the region, sending text messages to their loved ones back at home saying, "Can you help me?" Did the administration have a plan? What is the plan to get these Americans out?
You are seeing administration officials approach this with a new level of urgency today, Kristen, which I think answers your question, which seems to be they didn't have much of a comprehensive plan going into this. In fact, this is how the president responded to a question about that very concern a few hours ago. Listen.
Why wasn't there an evacuation plan, and will you send planes to get people out?
Well, because it happened all very quickly. We thought, and I thought maybe more so than most, I could ask Marco, but I thought we were going to have a situation where we were going to be attacked.
And Secretary Rubio was just asked about this a short time ago, Kristen, and he basically said, we're trying to get Americans who want to leave the region out on chartered planes. They are making those arrangements now, but they also urged them to try to leave commercially. But the big issue with that is that much of the airspace is closed in some of these countries, and the airports themselves are also shut down, and airlines have canceled flights. So this is a very huge logistical challenge and problem now, and that is why the State Department is urging Americans there, U.S. citizens, to reach out so they can basically complete a profile with the State Department, and then they can be in touch with them about these potential chartered flights. But again, that could take a long time to get set up. Kristen.
Monica, thank you for your great reporting. As we look at this graphic that we just put up, let us just remind our viewers, call this number if you need assistance, 202-501-4444. Again, 1-202-501-4444. Secretary of State Marco Rubio pointing people to that number. Monica, Alba, thank you so much for your great reporting as always. General Petraeus, I'd like to turn to you now before we delve into the specifics. What is your broad reaction to how this war has unfolded so far?
Well, there have been some extraordinary achievements. It's historic, needless to say, to have killed the supreme leader, the equivalent of the Minister of Defense, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs equivalent, and a number of other very senior leaders in the security forces. There's been enormous damage done to the principal targets of this operation, the ones that caused the worry, the missile program that Iran had tried to reconstitute, the launchers, and now probably even the manufacturing facilities. They've taken down a number of ships in the Navy. That should help over time to reduce the threats to the Strait of Hormuz. You were right to highlight that. We were watching the prices today. They actually topped $80 per barrel for a period, but then eased back a bit, perhaps when the president announced that our Navy will escort those ships. There's also been very substantial damage done to the regime force headquarters, other leaders, and indeed a variety of their bases and so forth. And I'm sure that if we haven't already, that there will be further strikes on the remnants of the nuclear program, especially given that the International Atomic Energy Agency says that there may be buried underneath the rubble at the Esfahan site a stockpile of 60% enriched uranium. I'm sure that our deep penetrating massive ordnance penetrators will give that attention over time as well. The real question, I think, is whether or not our strikes on the missile program, and also I should have mentioned the drone program, which has been a bit of a challenge, particularly in some of the countries of the Gulf states. In fact, I think it was drones that killed our 6 soldiers in the strikes in Kuwait. Some other countries, the UAE has done very impressively against that. They'd made not just the the investments that all the countries had made in ballistic missile defense, early warning, and interceptors, but also in the short-range artillery and air defenses. That's very, very important in this case. They have a layered defense, which has been quite effective, although you have seen still small numbers have gotten through and hit the parking lot outside our consulate. There was a hotel that was hit. And of course, Iran has broadened this war, I think, in an unwise way. They've carried out horizontal escalation, as they say, hitting civilian targets throughout the Gulf states. And these are states that wanted to take a knee on this one, to stay out of this. They denied our use of the air bases that we're often able to use. And now they've been brought into it by, I think, a very stupid decision, frankly, by the Iranians, and then also by some of their proxies, Hezbollah attacking Israel, and the response has been overwhelming there. And some of the Shia militia in Iraq that are supported by Iran have also carried out a few strikes, and there have been responses to that as well. But I think a big indicator will be what are the numbers of the drone and missile attacks over the next 24 hours. Have we been able to reduce those very substantially, which would be very encouraging, or is there a good bit more work to be done? Beyond that, there's the question, of course, about can this actually set the conditions for regime change, and can Iranians take advantage of that? And that's something that we're not yet seeing, for example, a splintering or a break-off or the emergence of some substantial opposition force, noting that the regime forces, however battered and damaged and degraded they may be, will still field somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 million men under arms who have shown a willingness to be very brutal to the Iranian citizens when they rise up.
General Petraeus, just to follow up on that point, a two-part question for you. On the question of regime change, can it be carried out in earnest without U.S. boots on the ground? And what is your biggest concern as you watch this unfold? In other words, what's the worst case scenario that you want the United States to avoid?
Well, I think the president was quite forthright in the Oval Office with Chancellor Merz when he said that the worst case would be someone else takes over. Maybe we did or did not have something to do with that, had a choice or not, but turns out to be another ideological hardliner like his two predecessors. In fact, the Assembly of Experts, of course, was meeting today to select the next supreme leader, and that was hit. That site was actually quite considerably damaged. I think you showed footage of that earlier. And so we'll see whether they reconvene and when they do and how quickly they do and how deeply underground that is. But again, the key is the U.S. from the air can do a great deal to damage these regime forces. But it can't bring about regime change through the air. In fact, the former Minister of Defense of Israel pointed that out today as well. So what would be the conditions on the ground that would enable individuals to rise up? And will they, in fact, do that? There are numerous opposition forces. There are Azeris, there are Kurds, there are Turkmen, there's even the Mujahideen al-Khalq that we dealt with in the wake of the invasion of Iraq. The real question is there real military capability that would break off under a charismatic leader, galvanize all the people to take on this murderous regime that has driven Iran into a ditch economically and isolation internationally?
General David Petraeus, thank you so much for joining us. Please come back soon. We really appreciate your perspective. Thank you, sir.
Good to be with you, Kristen.
Good to have you here. Matt, let me turn to you, and just so that our viewers understand where you are right now, you had to evacuate to a shelter because there was, in fact, a siren that went off, right, Matt? Give us the very latest.
That's right. And actually, you and your audience saw me just a moment ago when we were up on the roof. You had that beautiful skyline of Tel Aviv behind me. Ever since then, we got an alert on our phones. And this is how, as I've been explaining, this is how it goes. You get an alert on your phone, maybe 5 or 10 minutes pass, and then you hear the full siren outside. Everybody in the city can hear it. And that's when you have a minute and a half to go to a place like this, what Israelis call a mamad. This is a bomb shelter, but it's not in a basement. We're still on the 5th floor. And for most, this is enough to protect you not from a direct impact from an Iranian ballistic missile, but enough to protect you from an Iranian ballistic missile that might fall nearby. which can be very, very deadly to those who are not protected. But there have been people, unfortunately, in places like the one where I'm standing right now, who have died because of a direct hit.
Well, Matt, let me ask you, because Israel also announced a ground operation in southern Lebanon. What do we know about the goal of that?
Well, I mean, here among Israeli leadership, the fact that Hezbollah decided, and they did decide, to join the fight against Israel, they said, in retaliation for Israel assassinating the Ayatollah Khamenei, they have decided to enter this fight. They launched attacks against northern Israel. They've continued to launch northern attacks against Israel in the Golan Heights this afternoon. And then tonight, just an hour or two ago, in the northern town of Haifa and further south. So they are still fighting. They are still involved in this. The Israelis have said that they are going to be moving in. They are already taking the offensive and attacking Lebanon. There's already been well more than 100 people who have been killed. And now we have stopped short of seeing Israelis evacuating from the north of Israel, which is what they did after October 7th, when Hezbollah first decided that they were going to start attacking Israel in solidarity with another Iranian-backed proxy group, Hamas, which committed those atrocities on October 7th and set off this latest round of fighting.
Matt Bradley, please stay safe. Thank you so much for moving so quickly to safe ground and still bringing us that report, Matt. We really appreciate it. Thank you. I want to turn now to Courtney Kube here, who is with me. Court, you have some new details about the strategy moving forward, about what might be coming next. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so we've all been trying to figure out what the president meant when he's now told several different reporters that there's a big wave coming. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, also repeated this, that there's this huge next phase that's coming. So what we know is the phases so far, we've seen the initial phase where they use standoff weapons, tomahawks, aircraft from sort of outside Iranian airspace with long-range munitions. They take out air defenses and the kinds of things that could threaten U.S. aircraft and U.S. personnel when they're coming in to take follow-on strikes. Then they bring in the manned aircraft, the bombers, B-1s, B-2s. We've seen video of that. They start going after those hardened facilities that General Petraeus was just talking a little bit there, because it's not just the nuclear facilities that are hardened. A lot of their missile ones are, too. The production facilities, the storage facilities, the vertical silos where they create this program that is concerning, and it has been for years, frankly. But the big question is, what's this next big phase? Well, you would just by process of elimination, they've not gone after the nuclear program at all yet. And that is one of the first things. Yeah. So, we assume that that's going to be one of the next phases. But in this case right now, they are still firmly going after the ballistic missile program, the Navy, and the Air Force.
Well, it's just fascinating. When I talked to President Trump over the weekend, I asked him, what does success look like? He said, I think this has already been a success. But Courtney, based on your conversations, do you have a sense what's the ultimate goal here? How will the military know when that's been achieved?
So the military is actually in some ways the easy piece of this goal, because they have set out very direct, specific military objectives. So it is the destruction of the ballistic missile program. And you can have, there's a finite number of targets with that. We don't know what that is, but they're the launchers, the production, everything that I just went through. That's the missile program. They want to destroy the Navy. That's going after all the ships. It's going after the headquarters. They want to destroy the Air Force. Yes, that's going after the aircraft, but it's also pocking up the runways so that they can't take off from them, that kind of thing. Those are finite and defined goals. And the nuclear program as well, if they actually go after it. It's the regime change that's going to be tough here. And as you were just trying to talk to General Petraeus about, I don't know how the military will play a part in that. And if I'm candid, I don't know that the administration knows that either. If they're going to see how this unfolds, and then, as President Trump has said, see if the people rise up.
He continues to point to the people. He also posted on social media yesterday, Court, I'm going to read this. He says the United States munition stockpiles have, at the medium and upper medium grade, never been higher or better. Wars can be fought forever and very successfully using just these supplies? Give us the reality check here.
I don't know what medium and upper grade munitions are. I've been asking that question. I think he means medium and long range munitions, which if that is the case, yes, there is a huge stockpile of those. But that's not been the problem with this, and that's not been the concern all along. Yeah, I mean, they're always going to be worried about munitions, right? We've heard forever about 155 rounds in Ukraine. The concern here is the defensive capability, the defensive stockpile. So Iran has unleashed hundreds of missiles, probably at this point thousands of drones, and some allies are shooting some of them down. But the U.S. also has to be ready to shoot those down when they're targeting U.S. bases, if they end up going after ships, that kind of thing. And there is a finite number of those defensive munitions. Remember, during the 12-day war, after Operation Midnight Hammer, the U.S. had to fire off a lot of their Patriots, their THAADs, their longer-range systems to defend against Iran's incoming missiles and drones. So the stockpiles are down, and they cannot produce them as fast as they want to.
All right, Courtney Kube, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. I know you have been going nonstop.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.